J.D. Vance talks about how the United States is in the late Republican period. That's an exact phrase that he's used quite a few times. We are in the late Republican period. What does he mean by that? Well, the answer to that question tells you everything you need to know about the real agenda behind this administration. I'll come back to that in a moment. Now, I know that since this administration started, it's been an absolute jumble of initiatives. It feels like a disorganized mess. What is really going on?
New this morning, the U.S. Agency for International Development, also known as USAID, is telling its employees to not go into the office today. It comes as Elon Musk continues his apparent takeover of the agency.
Breaking news, a federal judge has temporarily blocked the Trump administration's freeze on federal grants and loans minutes before it was set to go into effect.
Happening today, a federal judge will hear arguments over temporarily pausing President Trump's executive order seeking to end birthright citizenship. Trump's order is currently on temporary hold nationally.
The CIA is now offering buyouts to its entire workforce, and Elon Musk facing criticism over his government revamp effort.
Sources tell ABC News President Trump could soon sign an executive order directing the Secretary of Education to dismantle the Department of Education.
Now, behind all of these different initiatives and all of these competing headlines, underneath it all is a unifying theme. And the unifying theme is that what they're deliberately trying to do with all of this is push the conflict to the courts. They're doing things that they know are going to be challenged by the courts. They're doing things that they know are actually illegal. They're doing that on purpose, because only one of two things will happen when all of these issues get to the courts. Either one, some of them get through. So for example, take birthright citizenship. That is a flagrant contravention of the United States Constitution, because it's clearly represented in the Constitution that anybody born on United States soil gets to be a US citizen. That's actually written into the Constitution. There's no question about that. Now, when that goes to the courts, one of two things will happen. Either the Supreme Court will turn around and say, actually, you can get away with that. We'll allow you to contravene the Constitution, in which case this administration becomes all-powerful at that moment. They have then proved that they can override the Constitution and have more power than any administration has done in American history. Now, the chances of that are admittedly small. Even with this Supreme Court, it's not very likely that they're going to turn around and say, yes, you can ride roughshod over the Constitution. Even this Supreme Court, with a majority for Trump, is unlikely to allow that. But if they don't allow it, then they still win. Because what they are planning to do is, if the Supreme Court eventually rules against them, then they will turn around and say, so what? We're going to do it anyway. At that point, the United States enters into a full-fledged constitutional crisis, because what they will have effectively done is demolished the power of the rule of law. They will just say, well, we're going to carry on anyway. And at that point, you move fully from a democratic country, which is based on rules that apply to everybody, regardless of who you are, to an authoritarian state where the rulers decide on what happens to everybody, and they are exempt from the law themselves. That's actually one of the key tenets of democracy. It came about from the Magna Carta in England hundreds of years ago. The idea that rules apply to those who are governed as well as those who do the governing. The law-based system means that it applies to everybody. They will have abolished that at that moment. Now, they're deliberately making sure that all of these challenges, because they're being challenged at the moment, all these different initiatives, all of these challenges work their way to the Supreme Court. They're waiting on that final showdown with the Supreme Court. And if the Supreme Court lets them through, then they'll have shown that they have ultimate power because they can override the Constitution. If the Supreme Court actually rejects this and defies them, then they will defy the Supreme Court. And at that point, they will have become all-powerful as well, because the Supreme Court don't have an army. Let's remember, Donald Trump asked in his first administration, when the Supreme Court ruled against him on one issue, he said, yes, but do they have an army? Do they have any way of enforcing their judgments? Actually, they don't, because it's based on the convention that is at the heart of democracy, the idea that we actually do what the courts say.
When the courts stop you, stand before the country like Andrew Jackson did and say the Chief Justice has made his ruling, now let him enforce it.
So, for them, this is a win-win. Either way, if the Supreme Court rules for them, it's a win. If the Supreme Court rules against them, it's a win. And they're pushing everything to that end. So their objective here is to break democracy. That is their objective, to actually destroy and dismantle the US democracy. And that is what J.D. Vance was talking about when he said we are in the late Republican period. In other words, he's talking about the way in which the Roman Empire used to be a republic. For about 1,000 years, it used to be a republic. They were governed by senators and a kind of democratic, semi-democratic system. And then, eventually, Julius Caesar came about and turned it into an empire. And after that, they went through a series of emperors, each of which was more destructive than the last, and eventually the Roman Empire fell. But they went from a republican phase into an empire phase. And that's exactly what J.D. Vance is talking about. They're in the late Republican period, in that the republic that the US is about to end, and they're going to go into a new phase, a phase of autocracy. This is something he talks about explicitly quite a lot.
We are in the late Republican period. If we're going to push back against it, we have to get pretty wild and pretty far out there and go in directions that a lot of conservatives right now are uncomfortable with.
Now, these ideas didn't come from nowhere. They didn't conjure up into J.D. Vance's head. They've been going around the New Right for some time. This has been a kind of philosophical strand that's existed behind Trumpism and behind some of the key folks around him for some time. And the sort of philosopher underneath this is a guy called Curtis Yarvin.
People in the New Right circles refer to Yarvin as Lord Yarvin or the Prophet. This isn't someone on the fringe of the movement. This is someone who is respected. Just like Peter Thiel, J.D. Vance is an avid reader and friend of Curtis Yarvin.
There's this guy, Curtis Yarvin, who's written about some of these things.
Vance not only name checks Curtis Yarvin, but he often uses his languages and repeats his ideas.
Now, he is sort of their guru, and he's somebody that a lot of these people have been following for some time.
Now, Yarvin has been called the house philosopher for billionaire Silicon Valley guy Peter Thiel and his extended Thielverse, which includes Vance, among others. He's argued that one of the problems with democracy, which he hates, is that the masses suck. He thinks government should be turned into smaller entities controlled with absolute rule by tech corporations and their CEOs, who act as dictators, ruling over these new despotisms, monarchies, and feudalisms. Now, there won't be any voting or democratic processes here, though the dictator CEOs might be appointed by property-owning shareholders. Now, in case this doesn't have you ready to turn in your democracy card and move into one of Yarvin's imagined patchwork cities, he also espouses pseudoscientific racism, in which, quote, white people are congenitally smarter than black and brown people, and that Chinese people may be the smartest of all.
So what Curtis Yarvin is essentially arguing is that democracy needs to be dismantled. Rather than having a democratic system of checks and balances and parliaments and elections, no, we need basically a dictator. And he's actually explicitly said in his writing that the US needs to be debugged from the idea that dictatorship is bad. So the idea that dictatorship is bad, the idea that autocracy has a bad name, is a bug in the system, and we need to repair that bug so that the US can actually go into a state of authoritarian rule. That's what he's looking for now. And of course, his words have influenced a whole range of people that are around Trump, like, for example, Peter Thiel. Thiel was one of the first Silicon Valley backers of Donald Trump. He's a huge supporter who's given millions of pounds to Trump over the years, and he is single-handedly responsible for creating J.D. Vance. He spent tens of millions of pounds in making J.D. Vance a senator. He was the single biggest donor to J.D. Vance. In fact, almost all of J.D. Vance's political career has been almost completely funded by Peter Thiel, who recognized in him somebody who could help bring their agenda to life. And Peter Thiel, this sort of tech billionaire, a colleague and friend of Elon Musk, they were both partners in setting up PayPal in the first place. These guys are all from South Africa, and they all share these strong authoritarian beliefs.
In 2009, Thiel wrote a manifesto called The Education of a Libertarian. In this manifesto, he disavows electoral politics and democracy because he doesn't trust the people with big decisions, and he's come to believe that democracy and freedom are inherently incompatible. Over time, he has talked extensively about finding areas where great men can make choices as they see fit, unbridled by the law. Thiel gave the Trump campaign $1.25 million.
What Trump represents isn't crazy, and it's not going away. He points toward a new Republican Party. He points even beyond the remaking of one party to a new American politics.
Now, what's interesting here is that there's a whole cohort of these tech billionaires that are actually from South Africa. There's Elon Musk, there's Peter Thiel, and there's others around them. There's several others who are from South Africa. And these guys have a common childhood experience, which is that they all lived in an apartheid regime in their childhoods, and they all experienced great privilege as a result of that. As a part of the white minority that was ruling exclusively the whole country, that had all the rights to all the big jobs, that had no barriers to any ability to rise to the top of society, they then watched that collapse around them, and they were traumatized by losing their state of privilege. And as a result, they seem to have now gone to other countries, particularly in the US, where they're now looking to recreate that system of privilege. Just think about it this way. Billionaires are not used to being told no by anybody. And they get to a stage where they can do literally what they want, wherever they want. Even the courts find it hard to obstruct them because they will spend millions and millions of pounds on lawyers to avoid facing any accountability or repercussions for their actions. The only thing that can stop them is government injunctions, government agencies. That's one of the biggest reasons why Elon Musk got involved in supporting Trump and the Republicans, because there are so many government agencies that are trying to take him to court right now for the deaths that have been caused by the self-driving cars and the accidents that have happened around that, for the, for example, the rockets that crashed even recently have caused damage around the world, and there are government agencies that are pursuing him for that. So all of this that he's engaged in has been a way to sidestep all of those things. So the objective here is to sort of create a system where they don't have any accountability at all, and they go back to a state a bit like in their childhood days where they had absolute privilege and they're able to ignore most of the population by basically ruling over them, just like in the apartheid days. So it's no coincidence that a lot of these people that are around Trump and doing a lot of the governing right now are actually originally from South Africa. Now, Trump is moving in this direction towards creating an authoritarian state instinctively. He doesn't have the blueprint in his head like they do. He doesn't have the roadmap drawn out like they do, but this is instinctively how he works anyway. So he kind of like works with them because, you know, this is how he puts one foot before the other, opposing enemies, moving forward to gain more and more power. He's liking that. And the thing is that over time, as they eventually defy the courts, as they eventually strip the legal system away from the American governance, what will happen then is that they have no guardrails, they have no inhibitions, they have no checks and balances whatsoever. They've already neutered Congress because they're not passing laws. They're not actually attempting to implement any bills through Congress. They haven't announced any of those, have they? What they're trying to do is to show that that is irrelevant, and that the next stage is to show that the courts are also irrelevant, so that they are the only show in town. And this leads us to realize that once that happens, then they don't have to worry anymore about Trump running for a third term. They don't even have to worry anymore about winning elections, because they know once they're in charge, nobody can stop them. Nobody can stop Trump from running for a third term. If he's already defied the Constitution, if he's already showed that you can be in flagrant contravention of the Constitution without any consequences, then running for a third term is no problem. Then even stealing an election is no problem because they're running the whole system. Everybody, even 10 layers deep in the bureaucracy then, is then their own loyal appointees. So they will get away with literally murder. And that's how authoritarian dictatorships work. They carry on and on, as long as they want to. Now this model, this idea has actually existed in the minds of these tech billionaires for years. It's a kind of techno-authoritarianism. It's the idea that actually democracy doesn't work, so what we need instead is an authoritarian system with one strong man at the top, and he is a man, with one strong man at the top who rules and governs. And this is why, you know, you'll often hear Elon Musk talking about, you know, if this election isn't won, then it'll be the end of civilization. And they really believe that. They really believe that all this diversity, all this sort of liberal and progressive politics, which leads to a diversity of voices and sometimes uncertainty, but a different form of movement in terms of human progress, all of this is leading to human destruction. The only way to save humanity is to have one authoritarian leader at the top who makes all the decisions. And then we can send a person to Mars, then we can get an interplanetary species. That's the only way it's going to work, is by having fiefdoms, by having individual men ruling over their territories. And that way we will have a stable species who can then do all the things it needs to do to colonize different planets and to create this interplanetary utopia, except it's only a utopia for the very few at the top. Everybody else doesn't get listened to, doesn't get governed in a fair way or a remotely democratic way. They won't even pretend that's the case. Now, this notion of an authoritarian system being the only thing that works, this notion of sort of needing a big daddy figure who rules over us, has been deep in human consciousness since the dawn of time. We've always had that idea within us, actually. It is part of human consciousness. This idea that actually, collaborating and listening to each other and working in a democratic way is all wishy-washy and airy-fairy. What we need to do is actually have a strong man who rules over us. Now, it's of course deeply wrong, deeply flawed and highly dangerous, and I'll talk about that later in this and in other videos. But this notion that we need and can only survive with this kind of authoritarian system has been deep in human consciousness. In fact, in our culture, this comes up all the time. Some of the greatest sci-fi writers and the greatest works of science fiction are about this. Dune is about this. Isaac Asimov's Foundation, which was the sort of forerunner for Dune and Star Wars and all of these sort of intergalactic sci-fi adventures, his book was also all about this. They believe that in the future, in these books, the way that we'll be governed is by a series of authoritarian leaders. So let's look at Dune quickly. There they have an emperor who rules over the whole galaxy, and he delegates authority to a series of big families, dukes, who run whole planets.
Of Shaddam, fourth of House Carino, ascendant to the golden lion throne of Padisha, emperor of the known universe, I stand before you as herald of the change. The emperor has spoken. House Atreides shall immediately take control of Arrakis and serve as its steward. Do you accept?
We are House Atreides. There is no call we do not answer. There is no faith that we betray. The Emperor asks us to bring peace to Arrakis. House Atreides accepts! Atreides! 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 Atreides!
And then we see in Isaac Asimov's Foundation an amazing story, amazing book. And in that, again, he talks about an emperor who is in charge of the entire known universe, a fully authoritarian dictator. Not only that, but the recent dramatization of it showed how the emperor has cloned himself to ensure that every successor is a cloned version of the same person. And they have three emperors, concurrently sitting on the throne. The one who is a child, so it's cloned from a child version. Another who is an adult, so that child then grows into an adult, and that becomes the main emperor. And then you have somebody who, the elderly emperor, who's sort of retiring. But they're all clones of the same original emperor. So there's three of them. So that person can discuss with himself how to govern, but the one who's the adult, not the elderly one or the child one, is the one who's ultimately in charge. So all based on this idea of one emperor, not just that, but forever one person. I'm sure that if Elon Musk could clone himself and ensure that he continues to rule forever, he would do that, right? This is exactly what fiction has predicted a huge strand of humanity would do if they could.
Dawn, day, dusk. The genetic dynasty, clones of Cleon I, decanted at different ages.
So we can see here what's going on is a deep level fight between the two opposing sides of the human psyche, if you like. The one side that believes that the only way to human salvation is through an authoritarian dictatorial system where one man rules completely, where the rule of law is abandoned, where parliamentary systems, where debate and discussion, where politics, where governance is completely abandoned, and instead we have what one person says everybody has to do. And a completely deliberately unequal system. The only person who has a say is the person at the top. That is one model of how humanity can progress. The fact is that that is almost certainly the road to destruction of our species, because the way in which our species actually advances is through social collaborative systems where we are able to learn from the kind of group collective consciousness and build on that. And I believe that our system of democracy was a step in that direction, but we haven't gone far enough. And that's why we're in the problems we're in now, because it's a very unstable step. Just representative democracy alone is not enough to prevent autocracy forming, every now and then, which has happened several times throughout history since our representative democracies have been established. What we need to do is deepen democracy so that everybody has a chance to have a say in how decisions are made. And I will talk more about that in future videos. But this is the juncture we are in now. Let's make no mistake about it. What Trump and Elon Musk and their acolytes are trying to do now is to deliberately dismantle and destroy the system of democracy. That is a direct strategy. And the problem is that much of the media, including the Democratic Party, are blissfully carrying on as if that wasn't the case. They're busy trying to figure out how to play a game of chess with the Republicans, when in actual fact the Republicans aren't playing chess at all. They're playing demolition derby, they're playing Jenga, they're playing a completely different game. They're playing a game of destruction. They're not playing a chess game. The Democrats are sitting there thinking about economic policy, and that's what people really care about, so let's focus on that instead. They're completely acting as if they don't really realize that what the Republicans here are doing is something completely different. They're not even playing the same game anymore. Their game is destroy and defeat. Destroy the entire system of government. They don't have much creative to do. The only creative thing is just making sure they're in charge, like the good old days in South Africa. That's all they want to create. But most of that involves destruction. That's what's going on right now. And all these initiatives, all this melee of seeming chaos is actually all directed towards one aim. Take this all the way to the Supreme Court, and then we'll dramatically abandon the rule of law in front of everybody and show them that might is right. Only we are the ones who rule, and you are the ones who are ruled. And that is the way it's always going to be from now on. That is their game plan. It's time to wake up to it. So as a psychiatrist and someone who's politically active, and also write a lot about politics and philosophy and other things, I'm going to be producing videos like this in the long run for some time now, and you'll really help get these videos out to other people by liking and subscribing. So if you can like and subscribe, what will happen is that it will help us with the algorithms on YouTube and bring these videos to more and more people. Would really appreciate this and keep us talking together, building awareness, building an understanding about what's really happening and what we can do to make a change and make things better and turn this story around. Thank you.